Okay, well, everyone, we're starting as we usually do, spiritual enrichment in springtime with some words about the environment from our green team and other members of our community. So today, very fortunate morning to have with us Scarlett Harper. And I'm sorry, Scarlett, I don't have your bio. Can someone have the Chuck?
I have Scarlett's bio here, and we are honored to have Scarlett with us this morning. She's quite an accomplished eighth grader. We're also very fortunate to have her parents and grandfather with us as well. So we've got three generations. And I first became familiar with Scarlett when she joined the Winnetka Environmental and Forestry Commission as one of our youth members. One of the only commissions, I think, that has a youth member, and that was done by design to incorporate those who are going to inherit the planet after we move on. and I came to know Scarlett for many accomplishments. She's quite an energetic person. She's been active on Go Green Winnetka, the District 36 Green Team, and the Winnetka Forestry and Environmental Commission. But probably her greatest accomplishment is going to Springfield and actually getting something done. And that's why we're fortunate enough to have her here today to show us how to get it done in Springfield. So, sure. Scarlett, please take it away.
Hi, my name is Scarlett, and today I'm here to talk about environmental activism and pollinator protection. Before we start, I just kind of want to give an overview of what I want to talk about today. As Mr. Down here mentioned, a couple years ago, I became very concerned with declining bee populations, and I was witnessing this in my own yard. I was seeing fewer species and fewer in general bees. And I was also seeing it in headlines across the country. And I ended up reaching out to my state representative, and we started the process of writing and passing a bill that regulated a group of pesticides that are a big factor in the struggles that bees have with their populations. Since then, people have asked me a lot of really great questions about the whole process. And I kind of want to tell my story today just by answering those questions, kind of in chronological order. And I hope that you all leave with some more information on how to be good stewards of the environment when it comes to pollinator protection. And additionally, that some of you might be able to use my blueprint as my story as a blueprint on how to become more civically engaged with lawmakers. The next slide. Thank you. Very often
read what is on the screen because it's too small for us.
Okay, of course. So one of the first questions that I often get is, what got you involved in environmental activism? That's the question there at the top. And ever since I was a very young kid, I would spend tons of my time outdoors. And I developed a really strong bond with many of the plants and animals and creatures that I found out there. And they became very important to me. And at a certain point, I learned about how much of the earth and its wildlife and those things that I had such a strong bond with were threatened by the climate crisis. And it was really overwhelming to me. I found that very scary, but what I realized was that to deal with that overwhelming stress, I needed to be part of the fight for the environment. And that's a picture of me there at one of the 2019 climate marches, the school strike ones. So, yeah.
Please don't drop your voice at the bottom because we can't hear you then.
Of course.
Yeah.
Come on, better over here.
Well, but come up here, then you can hear.
Yeah, I think it's good. Well, let's see, there's other chairs up here.
This is a great seat or right here?
Yeah.
So here. Right here. I can hear fine. Place right here.
No, but she needs.
Oh.
All right, and then that there is just a picture of me with a bee. I'm actually petting it. You can see the tiny little thing at the top of the thing. I was never afraid of them because they were such sweet creatures and very intelligent. And yeah, so I had a very strong bond with bees. The next slide. Thank you. So I actually just want to start with talking about why bees are so important. 1/3 of the human food supply is made possible by bees, whether that's by a plant that was pollinated by a bee that we eat, or a piece of meat that was from an animal that ate a plant that was pollinated by a bee. Bees are vital to our food supply, and they're also essential to our ecosystems. So bees pollinate the plants that support the whole ecosystem with food supply. So without bees, it's very hard for the ecosystems to stay in balance. And another question that I get a lot is, why is the issue of regulating mosquito pesticides so important? Because that's something that I've been focused on for a couple of years. So first of all, what exactly are the pesticides? Have any of you here, show of hands, ever received, say, a flyer for like Mosquito Joe or some other landscaping company asking if you wanted to get them to spray, say, every 2 weeks or maybe once a month, to deal with the nuisance of mosquitoes? But what that flyer won't say is that most common pesticide that they use is lethal to bees. It's harmful to many kinds of wildlife and whole ecosystems, because when ecosystems, which are very delicately balanced, have one species that is thrown out of balance by, say, a mosquito pesticide, the whole ecosystem is kind of thrown into chaos. Additionally, these pesticides are correlated with ADHD in kids and to harmed brain development. So they're not good pesticides, let's just say that. Another big problem with them is that they drift. So even say on a windy day, or even a less windy day, if only one house on a block sprays these pesticides, every house on the block will end up with these pesticides in their yard, and all of the wildlife on that block will end up dealing with the effects of these pesticides. Another really disturbing fact that I learned about these pesticides is that mosquitoes are becoming resistant to them. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that similar to antibiotic resistance, if there were a serious public health issue where, say, an outbreak of West Nile occurred, we might not have these pesticides as a tool to deal with it, which is a very scary situation. And it's caused by the overuse that we are doing today to prevent the nuisance of mosquitoes. Oftentimes, I think people think, well, you decided this was an issue, how did you get to wanting to write an Illinois law? And that was never where I thought I would end up. But I was on the Environmental Forestry Commission at the time, and I still am, and so I decided to bring it up there and see if this could be an issue that could be solved locally. But what I realized was that, and what I found out was that in Illinois, you can't regulate the issue of pesticides more at the local level or the village level than you do at the state level. So if anything happened, it would have to be at the state level. You can go. So I had gone from trying to make my yard a safe haven for pollinators and other wildlife, but found out that that was impossible because of pesticide drift after my neighbors were spraying these pesticides, to trying to address the issue locally and make this issue better in surrounding communities, to realizing that if I was going to achieve anything on this issue, it would have to be at the state level. How did I first approach a legislative quest? So oftentimes I think people are like, so you decided that you wanted to write this bill and you just went to your state representative, what? And looking back, I'm like, what? I was 9 at the time, and I don't know that I even realized that that was like a big leap. And as it turns out, it really wasn't. And I'm so glad that I didn't think of it like that, because I reached out to my state representative and we just set up a Zoom because it was during the pandemic and that was, the mode of communication. And I just asked her if she was interested in proposing a piece of legislation. And I was Zooming from my tiny little room, and my Zoom background was literally a staircase because I was underneath a staircase. At the meeting was that she was really excited about this issue and trying to write a bill, because I was really excited about this issue and trying to write a bill. And it didn't matter that I wasn't a lawyer or a lobbyist or even an expert on the topic, because that all you need to talk to your lawmakers is passion and an idea. So yeah, that's my recommendation for everyone. If you have a good idea, talk to your lawmakers. Sure. Yes.
Was that Robin Gable?
Yes, that was Representative Robin Gill. So what was the process of writing the bill like? It was really exciting, honestly, to be discussing how to draft the bill to be most effective while also picking up the least amount of opposition for the bill. It went through a lot of different versions and discussions with Representative Gable and with experts on the topic. We spoke to the head of the mosquito abatement district in this area because that's the government agency that deals with public health aspect of controlling mosquitoes, and they don't use these pesticides a lot. They agreed with us that this was an issue that needed to be addressed because mosquito resistance, because of the overuse of these pesticides by private companies, is making it harder for them to do their job in protecting us from viruses like West Nile. So they helped us find some of the flaws in our ideas and come up with a better version of the bill. And after a few different bill structures, we ended up with a bill that firstly outlawed subscription-based applications. So earlier, you know, I mentioned that a lot of those companies will just come, say, once a month or every 2 weeks and spray. Well, they do that without ever knowing whether there are mosquitoes in your yard. So this bill, the idea was to require them to find mosquitoes before spraying these pesticides so that we wouldn't end up overusing them so much. It also added licensing requirements for applying these pesticides. So applicators would need to learn a little bit more about how to apply these, for example, to cause the least harm to pollinators. It required signage and neighbor notifications by the applicator before spraying. And it obligated the applicator to inform clients of the health risks and the environmental risks to these pesticides so that they can make a decision on whether they actually wanted to be spraying these pesticides, knowing all of the information. That was really important to me. Go to the next slide.
What is the wind speed maximum when they apply it, do you know?
Currently there's not much of one. Originally in the bill, it was gonna be 3 miles an hour. That got changed. But I believe right now on the labels, it's 10 miles an hour, which is to cause a lot of drift. So that was the purpose of the wind speed max.
I've got a neighbor, so I'm thinking. They did not know, I've not been notified.
Yes, well, unfortunately, by the passage of the bill, that was not all that was included in it, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So what was testifying on behalf of the bill like? Before the bill, I really didn't realize the importance of committee hearings, but every bill has to go through a committee of lawmakers and be passed to continue moving on. And I got to testify at a committee hearing for my bill, which was really exciting. A lot of things went wrong that day. You can see that photo. The Wi-Fi had gone down in my house and it was on Zoom. And so I ended up doing it at my dad's office. It's a whole thing. But I was nervous before because I realized the importance of this and the fact that if this bill was going to continue moving forward, a lot of lawmakers needed to be inspired to do the right thing here. But it ended up passing bipartisanly 29-0 out of the Energy and Environment Committee. So it was a really big win for the bill. And it was really nice because a lot of the lawmakers afterwards kind of thanked me for being involved in the issue. And they want to see citizens, working on these issues with lawmakers. Okay, go to the next slide. After committee hearings, a lot was involved in getting support for the bill. So one of the very important parts to passing the bill is getting it co-sponsors. It's important because not only is a co-sponsor representative or senator saying that they're going to vote for the bill, it's also saying that they will help push to get the bill passed. And my representative, Robin Gable, she had a lot on her plate after the committee hearing, and she asked me if I might sort of be a big part of trying to get co-sponsors, which was really exciting for me because it was a chance for me to stay involved in the process of the bill. So I ended up sending individual emails to a pretty large percentage of the Illinois House of Representatives, asking them to become co-sponsors, and we ended up getting 22 co-sponsors, which was very good for a bill like this. And it helped it kind of continue with momentum. Another thing, that was important in getting support for this was getting media attention for the bill. What helped a lot with this was that I had an Instagram account where I had been posting about environmental topics for a couple of years and then started talking about the B-bill on it. And it got some attention from various media outlets who then asked if I would be interested in doing a couple of interviews about the B-bill and the issue. And this was nice for getting support for the bill, but also just for informing people about the topic, because even if it passes legislation, it's still just as important to get people to stop spraying these pesticides on their own and start doing things on their own to help pollinators. You can see that picture there. That's like in my backyard in a CBS interview with Michael George, and it was a super cool experience, and I just hope it got the word out a little bit about the issue. The next thing I want to talk about is witness slips. So back to the committee hearings. The witness slips are a super cool tool where basically citizens can vote on the bill and let representatives know whether they oppose or are for the bill or are neutral about it sometimes. And our bill ended up getting hundreds of witness slips for people saying that they wanted this bill to be passed. And that was really nice. And it was nice scrolling through those witness slips and realizing that many of them were people that I knew and people that had been a part of organizations that I had been in from the start. And it was nice that after being in those organizations a couple of years, now they were helping me out and doing the witness slips for my bill that I had signed for other bills that they had been pushing in the past. It was also interesting that I knew some of the opponent witness slips because those had been people that were in calls negotiating the bill with Representative Gable that I've been a part of in like choosing what would be in the bill. Definitely calls, putting in the reps were also really important, and it was nice to put in co-sponsors calls and get help from other organizations putting in calls with witness slips and all of these aspects. Definitely help from other organizations was really helpful. Yeah, go to the next slide. These were just a few photos from the full support process. That's on the left one example of a personalized email to one representative who ended up being a co-sponsor. It's one of the things that I did in those emails was find out like what bills they had co-sponsored in the past, what bills they were sponsoring. For example, this one, it says, I was talking about how he had co-sponsored a balloon bill and to prevent people from releasing balloons to prevent pollution, and like brought that up and just to show that you actually care, that they are important to this bill. And then that's a photo of a phone call to a representative asking for co-sponsorship. And then on the right is just, it's a short list of the co-sponsors. More were added after this, but that's some of them. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And then these were just some screenshots from media things that happened along the way. You can see me in a bee suit at a friend's apiary. That's one of them. So, all right. Continue.
Okay.
Okay, to tell the full story of this bill, I of course also need to mention some of the obstacles that happened in passing this bill. Unsurprisingly, the bill also gained some opposition in addition to the large amounts of support that it got, which is common for environmental bills and especially ones concerning pesticides. Groups like landscaping companies, and back to Mosquito Joe, you can see me holding up my little flyer. They were working to get many parts of the bill that made their jobs, that required them to be more responsible in their spraying. They were working to get those removed. And after my representatives discussing things with them, my representative ended up moving parts of the bill, and it had to go back to committee with amendments, and it ended up getting stalled until the end of the session because the Illinois legislative session is very short. So what that meant was that we would have to wait most of the year till the next legislative session before we could continue moving forward with the bill. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So a question I get a lot is, what was the passing of the bill like? So the next session, the bill started moving forward again. It was a little bit more of a bittersweet feeling because at that point I was a little bit less in the conversation and I felt like the opposition groups were getting more of a seat at the table. And my representatives and my senator ended up making compromises with the opposition groups that I was very unhappy with. For example, some of those aspects of the bill got removed, and the part that was really important to me of the banning of the subscription-based model, it would no longer be banned in the summer months, which is basically the only time that these pesticide applicators are spraying. We don't see a lot of them right now out in the winter. It was still very exciting because parts of the bill did get passed, and they will have the licensing parts got all passed, and many other parts were weakened but still passed. And it will still make a short-term difference and hopefully create a stepping stone bill for stronger bills in the future. One of the things that many representatives said as this was passed to me was that this was great because it set up some of the language and some of the starting things for a stronger bill the next year or the next year. And it also was getting attention around the country, so hopefully similar bills will be passed in other states. The other thing that was really nice about the passage of the bill is that it created a lot of awareness about the issue, because as I said before, it's just as important for people to make their own decisions in their own lives about not using these pesticides and about being good stewards of the environment. And it helps spread awareness about that. And additionally, I might not be here talking to you guys today if it weren't for the passage of this bill. So, you know, it was still a great experience. Okay, so we go. Okay. What have I learned about the legislative process from this whole process of passing the bill? First of all, my main takeaway is that lawmakers are vessels and they want to hear our ideas. So we need to be sharing our ideas and our points of view with our lawmakers because they will listen and they want to listen. They're called representatives for a reason because they're here to represent us, but they can't do that well unless we are engaged with them and letting them know what we want. And I feel as though oftentimes we elect our officials and then we forget that we still need to be communicating with them. And to pass strong legislation, it requires citizens urging our lawmakers to fight for the important parts of legislation and not just pass watered down bills. And when compromise occurs on bills, it never should compromise the integrity of the bill, which is something that we need to be communicating with our lawmakers. Okay, so now that I've kind of told you guys my story, I want to figure out how you all can kind of use that as a blueprint to think about what you all are going to do after this presentation, because coming to this is not enough. You got to keep doing things afterwards, and I'm going to hold you to that. So first of all, I want to ask you guys what inspires and motivates you, because this is totally different for every person. For some people, it's thinking about how great a world could be and how to help get that there and what you can do to help with the climate crisis. And it's about like hope for the actions you can take. But it's not like that for all people. For some people, it's about being slapped across the face with the terrifying facts of how awful climate change is. And it just depends on the person. So I want you guys to think back to a time when you felt really inspired and figure out what it was in that moment. And then when you're feeling less inspired or less motivated, try to conjure that, try to do the thing that will make you feel that way again. Because it's a long slog, and you're gonna have to motivate yourself again. Okay, slide please. Okay, second, I want to talk about what issues you're passionate about, because climate change is really, really overwhelming. And sometimes to kind of get through that overwhelmingness, it requires you to pick a sub issue that you feel like you can make a real difference on. That's why I've been working on this one particular issue of mosquito pesticides for the past couple of years. Not because I think it's the only problem in climate change, not because I think it's the most important problem, because it's one that I felt like I could make a difference in. And it requires everyone doing that to make a really big difference. The other thing is that some people just want to be involved in a little bit of every issue when it comes to climate change. And I think the best option there is to just join some environmental groups, because they will help guide you. They can help you figure out what sub issue you care about. And they will give you things to do. I feel like oftentimes, organizations send out action items like signing witness slips and making calls and sending emails and talking to your representatives. And I just want to remind you all that that stuff is really important. I hope this can kind of make you realize how important that stuff was to me when people in organizations that I was a part of were doing that. And that it made a big difference. And additionally, that can just be a great way if you need to lean on a different group to support you, that can be really helpful. Now, I recognize that maybe not everyone in this room is gonna think, oh, okay, I'm gonna go try to write a bill. But I hope that someone in this room will, because it's not that complicated. It's not like it's not like it requires some crazy profession or some crazy amount of experience. That's sort of what I realized now. And then you can hopefully use that group to support you. All right, next slide. What is an effective way to address your issue? So I sort of talked about some of this on the last slide and thinking about what's the actions that you want to take, but I just want you guys to be thinking about this long term. If you have something that you're passionate about, think about what it is that can help you get to a place where you're making an effective change on it. And obviously you're not going to know this in your mind right now, but just keep thinking about this because it's important to continue to do that over a long period of time and not forget. Okay, lastly, since I'm making a presentation about pollinator protection, I just want to, remind you all that there are plenty of actions that we can all take. And first of all, this might seem very obvious considering the whole presentation, but you would be surprised. Don't spray pesticides in your yard. Just don't do it. It's tempting. And there are plenty of things that we want to, but there are alternatives and there are natural alternatives, and it's terrible for the ecosystems and the environment and the wildlife. So just don't do it, please. Can I get a show of hands from everyone saying you won't? Yes.
What I can come living is Monday morning briskly, I should contact maintenance and the head Hilda Sager to ask what they are doing about this problem. And I would like to talk with you after I get your phone number and address, and perhaps put Hilda in contact with you and put my friend's foot down about saying this is basic, because we've got a square mile of beautifully taken care of botanic garden-like gardens and lawn. And right now, we have just tackled the problem of our lawns in front of 3 of our units flooded. So it's even with the grass. Guess why? Broken water main. And for 3 weeks, we've been flooded. And you can imagine when the mosquitoes come, which was my point on the phone 4 days ago, when they finally got there and found the problem and fixed the darn thing. So it does make a difference when you pick up the phone and say, help. And this is going to be an excellent follow through to that problem, because the water is still standing and there's scum on top and the mosquitoes can hardly wait.
I'm so glad that you were gonna bring that up, and that's amazing, and that's super helpful. And yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is that the reason that the North Shore Mosquito Abatement District that I talked about doesn't need to use these pesticides is because in most cases, they're not necessary. In most cases, removing the standing water in an area will really help fix the issue, or dealing with the mosquito larvae before they're adults. So yeah, in a lot of these scenarios, you don't need the pesticides. Okay, so a few more of these. First of all, plant native plants that flower at different times in the season to support pollinators, because it's very important to have our native plants here, and it's also very important that we can support our pollinators through the season so that we have food for them at different times. And kind of going along with that, I'm gonna ask you all for something. I'm gonna ask that you leave your dandelions this year and don't spray them, especially early in the season. I know. Still trying to convince people of this one, but First of all, the dandelions are one of the only food sources for bees early in the season, and so it helps them recover from their population losses over winter. And if they're sprayed, then they're ingesting lots of pesticides because it's one of the only flowers that they can get food from at this sort of point in the season. So please, I will understand if you want to remove them later in the season, and I will ask you not to, but if you want to, I'll understand, but leave them early in the season, please. It will actually make a big difference.
I'll mention that.
Thank you. And then buy plants that aren't pre-sprayed with pesticides, because even if you are not spraying pesticides in your own yard, some plants that you'll purchase will come with them, and then your yard is having the pesticides anyway. So just check. I think this is becoming less common at places where you can purchase plants, but just check. Additionally, please, still working on this one with my mom, but please leave fall leaves somewhere in your yard over the winter. It doesn't need to be that you're leaving your fall leaves everywhere, but if you put them somewhere, that's a really important habitat for native bees, so that they can make it through the winter and come back in the summer. And after Mother's Day and all of these have come out, you're welcome to chop those up and use them as ground cover, because it's also very important to bring nutrients that were pulled up into the leaves back into the soil to keep a sustainable soil.
Let me ask you a question. My wife Marla, we have a natural garden, bee friendly, all that, and we worked on it and we keep expanding it. But she says she doesn't want me to rake any leaves until later in May. I have to wait till, is that? And the same thing with, you know, I don't know what to do about the creeping Charlie, because I can put up with everything else. It's creeping Charlie. I feel like my bad neighbor. If we'd all just get rid of our grasses, we wouldn't have to worry about this. And I think that's kind of what we're slowly working on. But at the same time, you know, is that true? Should I keep the leaves down longer?
Yes, I think it's
And not
important.
cut the grass until, you know, it gets good and thick?
Yeah, I think that is actually very helpful, because if those bees are staying over the winter, it's a little bit longer before they're gonna try to come out. So it is actually helpful to keep it a little bit longer. And then after that, it's fine to move them around, that's really fine, but it's good. It's a good habitat and it's an important part of the ecosystem that is natural when humans aren't around. So yes, that's very important.
We could also use mulch, those lawnmowers that crunch it, I forgot the name.
Mulching.
Mulch, is that all you call them, mulchers? Well, anyway, instead of raking your leaves, just mulch them.
Yes. Absolutely.
Perfect, I haven't raked my leaves in, I don't know.
I'm so glad. On
It's
that
easier.
I just live, I just cut the grass with the leaf. I choose to cut the grass when there were enough leaves to make it interesting, but not wait so long that it would fog the more.
one.
I mean, there's a balance.
Yes.
So I seldom had to rake leaves, and I had several maple trees, so you knew how many leaves there were around.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, that's sort of why I say that if you don't want to leave the leaves wherever they fell, you can also just put them somewhere in the yard, because that's still better. And okay, you were kind of mentioning this one, but if you can, please shrink your lawn and increase the space that you're planting plants, and especially native plants like milkweed. Because actually, if you have a lawn space, just think about how much of it you're actually using, and then get rid of the rest of it. Because you don't,
Little what?
lawn space.
No, more garden, less lawn.
Yes, exactly.
There's a organization I know in DuPage County where I live, that approves a yard after you've worked on it and says you're a natural, native gardener. And, but they also do something, they'll come around and tell you which plants are not native. And they go through everything, and because we don't know, and sometimes even that person who's really an expert, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. But it's a free service.
That's amazing.
So I don't know if you have it here or not, but we found it invaluable. We slowly got into the buckthorn, and we have to use some heavy stuff to kill the buckthorn, because you gotta clean the trunks, unfortunately. But we don't use that for anything else to get rid of, you know, grass from the driveway. I just have to do it the hard way.
Yeah.
But
Watch out for buckthorn. You think you've got a lilac bush, in the middle of it is growing the buckthorn.
Oh, that's what happened.
And the needles are, I had a big buckthorn here when I first moved in years ago in Northbrook. The needles are a full inch long, and in the old days, Indian women used them to sew deerskin.
For the buckthorn.
Buckthorn, they are that neat, and they go faster than anything else you can imagine.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, couple more of these, on all of these points, I'm gonna ask you guys to talk to your friends, and your family and your neighbors and ask them to do them too, because if we can magnify the effect of these few simple actions, it will make a much bigger difference. And it's a super easy conversation to have. In fact, if anyone wants to take a picture of this list so that they can share it with anyone, I would please ask if they do. And also, this is also just something that I think is very important to me, which is to take time to appreciate the tiniest and most vulnerable creatures. Because they're so important, things like bees and bugs and insects, but in our crazy lives, sometimes we overlook them. And if we can be a voice for those creatures and the earth, it can make a really big difference. Okay, slide. If anyone just has any questions,
Yes. Are you a beekeeper?
I am not, I would like to be, still working on that.
Because I think one of the questions.
I'm sure actually my son's first one, or my son's last year was, so yeah, that wasn't.
There's a lady in Winnetka by the name of Gina Matthews. She lives on Golf Lane there, and she keeps bees, and she even gave me honey this year.
That's lovely.
Yes, but she's a very large bird, but I do have one commentary about the North Shore mosquito abatement group.
Yes.
Because I know about 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, we had tremendous amounts of rain. I live on a corner property in Winnetka and Kenilworth, which is very close to the tracks, and the old North Shore line, there's a lot of standing water there. And they used to, the first week they were going to come and spray our village of Kenilworth, let us know. And they come in the middle of the night, but they have a huge yellow machine with great big yellow lights on it. It's very futuristic looking and scary. But after that, the next couple of weeks they did, and I would wake up in the middle of the night because I have a corner property, and they sprayed very heavily. Consequence of all that was the next spring we had no birds. All of our crows were gone. And I have mentioned this numerous times to our village over the years, because we have lost a third of our bird population in the United States, which is like 3 billion. And but I must say, I think, you know, that the North Shore mosquito abatement has really listened to this, because we had a lot of birds this spring, beginning in February, which is very important. My second question, I have 2 more times. Quick. I think it would be very beneficial for our green group to have a very concise list of bulletin of how to pass a bill.
Absolutely.
That would be very helpful. And also, you know, these the chemicals that are in that kill mosquitoes. I know there are 2 or 3 essential toxic chemicals that they're finding in the water supply in Chicago and across the United States that are very detrimental to human health. And I'm wondering if these are the same, some of the same chemicals.
One of the main chemicals here.
You mentioned water.
Oh, yeah, one of the main chemicals here is the pyrethroid. It's the term for like the main chemical used in this. I don't know if it's the same one. I don't know if that's ending up in the water supply, but it certainly would make sense. And there are also harmful to fish and other aquatic organisms. So that would make perfect sense.
There's
What
a
is the
foam,
name of
there's
that
a
chemical
foam,
What is the name of that?
It's called a pyrethroid. I can put it here.
Pyrethroid.
Yeah, it's like PY.
It was on one of your slides.
You are a very exciting and stimulating. speaker.
Oh, yeah.
You got us all
Thank you.
energized.
I'm so glad. That's my hope. Okay, yes.
Scarlett, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. When we were. When we were talking earlier, you said that you first became interested in learning about, you know, and invested in nature just from spending so much time outside. But I'm curious because you have such a wide berth of knowledge about your bees, pesticides and everything else. How did you continue learning about? I mean, I know you've had a lot of like on the ground research.
Mhm.
How, like, what were your other ways of learning about everything that you know right now?
So, okay, during the process of the bill, I learned, like, I got some very, trustworthy information because we would have like fact sheets that we would get from, colleges like Northwestern to learn about the effects of the pesticides, and we would ask, like, Representative Gable would ask them just to do a little bit of research and try to confirm some of these things so that we can use that as a talking point. But otherwise, honestly, it was just a ton of research.
And
And
it was just, you were curious and you just, did your
yes,
own independent investigations.
yes. Mhm.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Does the internet make that so much easier?
Hmm?
Internet.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. I lived, back in the days of 3x5 note cards. And it was in the library. And that's how we learned it, but we tell you it took time.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
lucky you. You could put the whole bunch.
I know, it is really nice that, so much of this information is now available on the web, and that it makes it a lot easier to, have things to talk about.
What I love about this issue is that it's something most of us can do something immediately about, because most of us have yards.
Yes, exactly.
And so we can do something beyond us, but ourselves, that we can make a difference.
Mhm.
And what I was gonna ask you, if you know, I've been using these little foam stuff, you put it in bird baths, or you put it in we have a irrigation thing that we collect rainwater. So we put, and it's supposed to kill the mosquito larvae. I hear it's safe, but I wonder about that sometimes, because sometimes thinking things are safe or not.
Mhm.
But I'm just wondering if I'd love to just give a packet to my neighbors, because if they're not doing it and I'm doing it,
Mhm.
maybe, hey, this is an alternative to your spraying that yard.
Absolutely, yeah, and addressing about the mosquito larva is usually a better option. The other thing is, if you're curious, the North Shore Mosquito Abatement District is like, they're a very open group, and they're very happy to come for free and look at your yard and tell you what you could be doing to end up with minimal mosquitoes without spraying pesticides.
That
And
extends northward.
I think
With our
so.
flood,
Yeah, you should totally try to reach out to them. I'm not
North Shore. Say that name again.
North Shore Mosquito Abatement. And I agree with
North Shore
that.
Mosquito Abatement.
They're in
Yes.
Northfield, their headquarters is in Northfield.
Yes,
Even
But
closer.
they're not spraying.
no, squarely there, not.
Scarlett, what's the name of the Evanston company that uses cedar oil?
That's another great point. Yeah, if you're looking for a good company that does natural alternatives to mosquito pesticides, there's a company based in Evanston called Greenwise. And I wouldn't trust a company just because it has the word green in it, because but Greenwise is actually very into natural alternatives, and they can help you deal with some of the mosquito problems and landscaping things without using pesticides. So yes, I recommend that to anyone who's interested.
I would like to make a comment though about this beautiful young lady who is so articulate and has accomplished so much in her life. As a primary teacher in school and also high school, a child is a product of the environment, their early environment. And obviously, this young lady had parents who spent time talking to her and grandparents. And that is one of the, spending time with young children and speaking with them rather than having them watch television and encouraging them to learn and helping them learn is one of the most important things we possibly can do for our environment and for the future. So I applaud all the parents.
Yeah.
Scarlett, we have a large piece of property here. Would be, besides calling North Shore Mosquito Abatement and finding out what we're doing here, talking to our landscaping group and finding out what they're doing. That is just to become more aware, because as we all point out, we all have yards, but we have this collective community yard that we want to take really good care of. So what kind of resistance do you think we would face if we started beekeeping here on this property?
Honestly, I mean, I have friends who've done it, and I think that it's very possible. Okay, one of the main challenges that is one of the reasons that we don't currently beekeep is that I think once a season the bees do this, it's called swarming, and a group of
Yes.
them will leave the hive.
Yeah.
So, you would want to have either a second home for them, over time, your bee population is gonna grow, and therefore you're gonna need more than one thing, or you're going to need someone else to take that swarm of bees and give them a home. But honestly, on this very large property, I think it's possible to let that grow over time a little bit.
I have to raise a real hand on this.
Well,
There is such a thing as an allergy to bee sting, and I have a friend who was a TV installer, had to be outside a lot. And he tells me he always carried that medicine. I forget the name of it. EpiPen, yeah. And he was on the roof of a second-story house. There was a ladder. And something serious buzzed at him. He said, I didn't use it once. I slid down the ladder. Breaking a leg would not be as dangerous as being stung to death, because it would kill him, and he was not in the situation to use the epi.
well, and you
And we
bring up,
just cannot have bees flirting about, because there's going to be somebody around there who's allergic to bee sting, and it will kill you.
well, and what you're bringing up, Losie, is exactly the kind of many considerations need to
Sure.
be taken place, and many people are, for very good reasons, as you explained, very afraid of bee stings. So again, I'm not recommending we put a hive out just yet. But again, as a community and as a faith-based group that feels our responsibility to the environment is more than altruism. It's vital to our souls that we take care of God's creation, that these are the kinds of things we want to explore, and it's been so helpful in kind of getting us started.
I go talk to the Botanic Gardens because they have an apiary in a public space near the vegetable and fruit garden. And I'm sure there's some discussion that happened there that you could probably find out.
I will mention, there's tons of people are afraid of bees, and many of my friends are, and I totally understand people with allergies, but bees don't want to sting anyone. And I think that a fact that very few people know is that if a bee stings you, it will die. So they only sting as a last resort, and they only sting as the fact that bees have stingers is only to protect the whole hive and not the individual bee. It's so that people are a little bit afraid of bees, but if it were, obviously, we're not gonna put, a hive at the front door. That would be a little bit troubling, but there's plenty of space.
Yeah, right.
Yes, of course, those are not the kind that would be in an apiary.
Understandable, but there have been, over the last couple of years, talk about bees coming from somewhere in the south. That
Yeah.
was trying to invade the southern part of our country. Can you comment about that?
I remember this whole discussion, and it was scary, but I think it's become honestly less of a concern the past couple of years. And I'm sure that that's also a problem for native bee populations, because then, sometimes there's conflict between the two kinds of species.
Yeah, Scarlett, what's your future endeavors? What do you, and you've learned so much about government and so much about passing bills and about green structure. What are your future interests or the things that?
Can we vote for you?
Hopefully someday. In the short-term future, there are definitely more bills that I want to work on. My representative wants to see sort of how this bill gets implemented and how that works before working on the next stage of it, hopefully, and the future bills that I wanted to use this as a bridge to. And I don't know, long-term, I think that I would love to pursue, after this whole experience, life and policy, and of course, always science.
Two more people, Blake?
Well, I just, because the mention of native bees and wild bees and the question about how to be a good steward, what came up. I know that I learned as part of this, just that you don't necessarily have to have an apiary alone, if that's a bridge too far. And that you can be a home for the, miles of track for bees and, to be a resting place, feeding place. There are many bees that don't live in large hives, so wild bees are just as important to the overall. So there's more that you can do than just setting up an apiary if that's, a bit too far.
Absolutely, and also it's worth noting that, while honeybees are incredibly important to our food supply, there aren't actually native bees to, much of the US. And so we also have to support the native bees that are important to different kinds of plants in our ecosystems and all of that. And, sometimes there's competition between honeybees that live in hives and those bees, so we have to support both.
Yeah, because there's honeybees, but you also have the yellow jackets, and then I have carpenter bees, Merle, the one about what to do about my wood deck. So, but, and some are more, or aren't some better pollinators and some are not?
Yeah. And there are tons of species of bumblebees that are, I know personally, I've seen fewer species of them in recent years, and I've seen fewer of the species that I do see. So yeah, there are many different types of bees, and I think that because each of them are kind of suited for a different type of plant or different kind of flower, it's important that we have the diversity of all of those bees. So that's also why it's important to have different kinds of native plants and ones that flower at different times in the season.
Scarlett, could you give us a sense of the other pollinators compared to the bees? Because I noticed in my zucchini plants, there are lots of other little things in there scurrying around in the flowers. What are your thoughts on other pollinators?
Yeah, I will say, okay, insects, this is something I learned in biology like a couple weeks ago, which I found super fascinating. Insects are like the one kind of, like type of species or type of organism that has like the fewest endangered species, but bees are definitely becoming more endangered, and there are types of bees that are, but other pollinators are incredibly important too. And I know that here is a stopping place for many types of monarchs, or just monarchs in general, on their journey and migration every year. So it's incredibly important that we support them by planting milkweed.
We're planting milkweed out at Covenant Wood.
Okay.
Yes, we're very aware of that.
That's great. Yeah, it's really important, and trust me, if you plant milkweed, you will see little caterpillars. Every year they will come. So yeah.
There's a hand up over here, long time.
Oh, well, to go back to what you were saying is by putting up beehives also, you actually create places for bees to be so that you don't have them in places they shouldn't be.
Exactly.
So that is one thing that I've learned too from a friend who's very allergic to bees, but she's created beehives in her home. So that's kind of how she puts them all in one location to not have them in places they shouldn't be.
That's great. And also, yes, yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's really cool too that, just to think about the fact that sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. I was thinking something and I forgot it. So I'll come back to it if I think.
Oh, it happens to young people too.
My thought is, if, we have these lovely lawns, which we're probably not supposed to have, but, but we use them, we have meetings out there, and we have egg hunts to Easter and stuff, but I'm thinking about, and we certainly don't want concrete, because we want permeable surfaces. I'm trying to think what we could have out there. I could maybe chopped oak leaves, so we can still meet out there.
It would be very soggy in the rain.
We are not out there in the rain.
It wouldn't work.
So we're all thinking, you can see.
Yes, no, that's great. Yeah, and I understand the need occasionally for some lawn space. But also it's possible then to think about what if that gets used and then take the other.
I've got the idea. We have to have pavers because in Kenworth, because we've been trying to get rid of stormwater. So one area of our Kenworth, we have permeable asphalt, which can take 200,000 gallons of water and it disappears in 2 minutes. With the fire department visit. But on the other part, we found, which is better, we now have pavers, stones with, so the water can go down. So there we go.
That's awesome. Yes, pavers like that. Yeah. And also in lawns, if you need a lawn space, if you can also allow things like clover and dandelions and other little things that aren't a nuisance to the lawn itself, that's great for supporting different kinds of insects and bees too.
You're such a fun of knowledge. I think you've been one of the most exciting speakers we've ever had.
I want you to envision a house that I once saw years ago in the middle of the biggest resort town we know, Vail, Colorado. There was a lawn that was nothing, it was a friend of ours, nothing but dandelions.
Oh, beautiful.
It was this high filled with dandelions.
Beautiful.
Good.
Yeah, and it was probably great for pollinators.
Wouldn't that be, amazing if we could change the mindset?
Absolutely,
And
because
then I could forage and eat them because I eat dandelions.
they're edible. Yeah, and I just think we need to change the mindset about some of the things that we consider weeds, like the fact that milkweed is called a milkweed causes, I think, fewer people to plant it, and dandelions are considered weeds, but a bunch of the things that are sometimes considered weeds are actually native plants that are important. There are also plenty of weeds that are invasive, but just remembering to figure out which is which.
Yeah.
Also,
Pick
if you
your
put
target.
chilled witch hazel in your refrigerator and put that on a bee sting, try it.
What?
Children with hazel.
I said
Too bad, base. Well, I guess it's almost time for church, everybody, but again, thank you, Scarlett. Could not have kicked off our spring for the church and our spiritual enrichment group in a better way. We are a self-selecting, pretty committed group of, I could say we're activists, aren't we? Looking for ways to act individually and this group and this church community, so it's a lot, you've given us food for thought and some inspiration, so. And I think